Hey, Isaac, thanks for coming back on so soon. Really appreciate it, brother.
Yeah, definitely. The pleasure's all mine. Thanks for having me back on.
It was just an avalanche of questions last time, and it just
Was it?
flew.
Okay. All right. I'm here
Yeah,
to try my best to answer them. We'll see if I can.
thank you. For people who are not familiar with your brilliant work, can you just give them a little summary of what you do and what you're about?
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. So I've been truthing since 2011, so going on 11 years now. I started a blog, illuminatiwatcher.com, back when blogs were a thing that people visited. And then over the years it progressed to a YouTube channel and a podcast in 2014, then writing several books. I've written 9 books, all on Amazon and Audible. And over the years I've been subjected to a horrific amount of censorship, which is bizarre. When you know my work, you know that I'm not a good truther. I always say, and I mean that, because I'm a very rational, skeptical person. I did not get into this for it to become a successful podcast or book selling career or anything like that. I've got a master's degree in systems engineering. That was my path. Science was my path. And this was always a side interest. So, in a lot of ways, I'm probably the most rational voice. Not the most. I'm a very rational voice in the conspiracy world. And the fact that they've censored me so hard, and I've been kicked off of YouTube, I've been kicked off of Vimeo, Google shadow banned me, and the list goes on and on. I've been sued. I mean, it goes on and on. You wouldn't believe it. So to me, the fact that all these things happen to my research, that supports me, and it drives me further to be like, okay, something's going on. When the guy who's trying to be the rational, sane voice and pointing out actual research and references and citations is getting banned, that tells me maybe I'm onto something. Maybe there's some truth to this idea of a Illuminati, secret society running the world.
Yes, and just to give a quick disclaimer, then this is an educational interview based on Isaac's historical research,
Yeah, we'll
and
try. We'll try to keep it very safe for YouTube. I'll do my best to use the proper words and such.
so let's safely dive into the occult connections to aliens from John Dee to Aleister Crowley.
Yeah, definitely. And there's nothing safe about any of this. Let me tell you,
Oh
buddy.
God.
But no, I'm just kidding. And so like I always say, I'm not an expert on any one subject. I'm more of a breadth than depth kind of guy. But when it comes to the alien topic, I dedicated a couple years of research. Well, it was actually several years, because I wrote a book called The Dark Path that was a very comprehensive take on where I was in my understanding of how the occult sciences influence our reality, and secret societies and groups that practice these things, ritual magic, and so on. So I decided to write a book about the alien phenomenon, and that was in 2017. I started researching for it, and then in 2020, all the things that happened. One of which was, I believe, in March was when the government disclosure happened, and I said, "Oh boy, I better hustle this along." So I accelerated the research, and when it comes to aliens, clearly not a new phenomenon. These things have been going on, arguably as old as human history. You could point to a lot of ideas presented by Ancient Aliens, which is a show that I've poked a lot of holes in, and I don't take everything they say as fact. There's a lot of misleading information, I believe, on that show, but I love it. It's a great show. But there are some things that are very questionable about our accepted view of human history. But to me, what I think the cutting edge of the alien phenomenon story, and what I wanted to contribute in my books, it's called Aliens, UFOs, and the Occult: Use Illusion 1 and 2. And the reason I call it that is because I think there's a mental component here. And I can't help but see the chat on the side. My last name is Weishaupt. It's a pseudonym, not a real name. A very poorly chosen pseudonym, because the founder of the Bavarian Illuminati is Adam Weishaupt. Anyways, not my real name. Stupid pseudonym. It's too late now. Okay. So the idea I wanted to contribute was, when you look at some of the cutting edge technologies of quantum physics and our understanding of reality, and you fuse that with the occult sciences, you find out that a lot of these ideas that have been talked about, practiced, written about for hundreds of years, going back to, John Dee, for example. He's one figure, 15th century advisor to Queen Elizabeth, is practicing all these occult ideas. They were using these methods of ritual magic and alchemy and these occult sciences to make contact with entities. John Dee famously wrote the Enochian language, which was supposedly the language given to Adam in the Garden of Eden for him to talk to the gods. And there's different flavors and takes on all of this, first off. So don't take everything I say fully as the whole truth and nothing but the truth. But John Dee wrote the Enochian tablets. It's a grid of symbols and sigils and words you can use to make contact and facilitate a communication with angelic beings, which is, I argue, aliens, right? Interdimensional entities. And the occultists over the years, they've shared these concepts. And you fast forward to a guy named Aleister Crowley, who a lot of people are familiar with the guy. He's a very seedy character, doesn't have a good track record of I'm trying to be careful with what I say, but a lot of people claim that he did a lot of bad things, right? Now, he was reading through all this occult literature and trying to understand how all of these practices could be used for his advantage. He took a little bit of this and a little bit of that and put it in a blender and was like, look, whatever works is the truth. So he took some of the ideas of John Dee's Enochian language. He took some ideas from the book of Abramelin, these different magical books and incantations, and he basically did whatever it took to do whatever he could. And he made contact with various entities over the years. And then you look at some of the projects, like Project Stargate with the CIA. I don't know if you're familiar with that. You look at MK
expand.
Ultra. Oh, okay.
I'm familiar with MK Ultra, but not Stargate.
Yeah, so if you look at The Men Who Stare at Goats, that movie, right? They were talking about the powers of the mind, and it's presented in a comedic fashion, that movie, but it's based on some real events that they thought the CIA was doing a lot of these weird psychological experiments, and you can find a lot of these on I forget the website. It's like a FOIA.gov website where they released a lot of these CIA documents that had previously been hidden from the public, but they were doing a lot of mental psychological experiments, which included remote viewing. I read this one document that there was a guy who was remote viewing to like 2 million years ago to a specific place on Mars, and he was talking about these, and while he's in this sort of trance state or remote viewing state, he could see pyramids and massive tall beings. I mean, it's creepy, it's scary stuff. But the Project Stargate, it looked at all these things, and it has all these. There's a lot of rabbit holes when you talk about these subjects, right? And one idea, like I brought up MK Ultra, which was like a lot of similar experimentation. Stanford Research, SRI, they were used for this Stargate project, which had all these key figures that just so happened to be part of the alien disclosure phenomenon of the last couple years. We're talking about Ingo Swann. We're talking about Hal Puthoff, Russell Targ, Uri Geller. They were all sort of part of these experiments to study the paranormal. And Hal Puthoff, he's like a key figure. He's been on Ancient Aliens, and he's a founder of To the Stars Academy, which again, many rabbit holes here. To the Stars Academy is Tom DeLonge. He's a guy from the Blink-182 band, right? Also a Freemason, which I know you've got some Freemasonic stuff on your show here, so I thought I'd throw that in there. But he started To the Stars Academy with the idea of using a multimedia project to basically convince the masses that aliens exist, which is what I'm trying to point out with all my work through the Use Your Illusion books and through all my podcast episodes where I talk about pop culture shows on Netflix like Archive 81. They're showing us things that are real through a fictionalized experience. And that's exactly what To the Stars Academy was doing. They had a plan where they were going to write several books, fiction and nonfiction, several films, fiction and nonfiction, because they wanted to approach the subject. And you have to sort of see these ideas to the masses. And that's where, the symbolism comes in. But, Hal Puthoff was part of this organization too. And to me, it's just very curious that there's always like a couple of degrees of separation between intelligence, the occult, channeling aliens, and various entities and stuff. But in my books, we go through a lot of these rabbit holes of all these characters that are bringing us the new alien phenomenon, which I argue is actually an old phenomenon. They're just doing a revelation of the method to reveal to the public, like, oh, by the way, we do all these occult things and channel aliens. You got to get us to accept it at some point.
So you mentioned John Dee then earlier as being a key figure in all this. What led him to this path? Was it his study of the ancient religions?
Yeah, so he was into a lot of the early occultists. They were into alchemy, right, and astrology. And what drove them towards this was back then there was the church had all the influence. They had all the power. They were the ones that decided what was the quote unquote truth and what wasn't, right? And the scientists of the day were sort of shunned, right? They were kind of dabbling around with things that they shouldn't have because the truth came from the church, not science. But the scientists, they all, and rightfully so, they all believed that there were elements of our real world of reality that couldn't be explained through religion. So the early alchemists were trying to find this sort of a spiritualized science, where science is to us nowadays is kind of an atheist sort of idea. But the early John Dee types, Isaac Newton, these guys were alchemists, and they were trying to sort of find this perfect solution, I would argue, of spiritualized science and man's place in the universe and observing the laws of the universe so that man could come to what they believed to be the real truth through reason. And to defend the scientists, because like I said, I studied science for several years, the universe does speak to us through mathematics. And if I did a minor in math, so I took like math courses that would make your head spin. It was like calculus 1, 2, and 3, and linears and differentials and number theory. Like, I mean, I was out there in like la la land with math sometimes. I was like, it's like hallucinating sometimes when you're looking at this stuff. And when you get to a point where you understand what they were writing down, there is beauty in these equations. We would study these functional equations, and once you figured out how they derived them and how they all fit together, it was like, man, like, you believe in God. You're like, dude, this is wild how this stuff really has an effect on nature and reality. So the scientists, the early scientists and the alchemists, they were kind of proving God existed in a way through their studies. Now today, we've sort of, I would argue, lost our way, and a lot of people think science means there's no room for God, which I disagree very much so. I'm all for spirituality, and like I always say, the occult it just means hidden. It doesn't necessarily mean bad, but some of these occultists, I would argue, are very dangerous. Some of these ideas are very dangerous, which is kind of my warning with the aliens, right? I've always been intrigued by aliens. I want to know just as much as the next person if they exist, what are they, where are they from, how do we manifest them? But I would argue that we need to be very careful, because I'm more in the camp of aliens are multidimensional, that they could be angelic or demonic, but man doesn't have the discernment to know the difference. And the practices, I believe, that these people could be using are very occult in nature. And I'll point to one example of such. There's a researcher named Peter Levenda that I respect very much so. This guy, I'm always bragging him up because I'm hoping he does my show someday. I can't get a hold of the guy to get him to do my show. He knows, because I read several of his books. He knows everything about these occult sciences. The guy is like the most knowledgeable person I could even know of. And Tom DeLonge, the guy from Blink-182, started this To the Stars Academy venture where he was like, I'm going to write several books and have several movies, and we're going to basically, prove to the public that aliens exist, right? And who does he choose to write this book with him but Peter Levenda? There's 3 books, right? And Peter Levenda wrote it, and I read it, the first one, and because I knew Peter Levenda's work, I'm reading it, I'm like, dude, this is entirely Peter Levenda's writing. And a lot of the occult ideas are buried within the books, and you wouldn't know it if you didn't know what you were looking at, right? There's a lot of ideas that I think they're subtly trying to float into the masses. They're not going to do this in like 2 years. I mean, we're talking, this is like a 10-year timeline of slowly seeing how the public reacts to the idea that they could channel ascended masters, they would call it, or higher intelligence, because that's what Aleister Crowley and all these guys were always talking about, is that mankind needs these aliens to come and save us, to give us the knowledge, to give us the intelligence, all that stuff. And my argument is we need to be more careful than that. We're dabbling around with something that we don't really understand.
So one of the questions that's come in is, what or who did Crowley actually communicate with?
So he told us, the name, it's I think it's pronounced Aiwass, Aiwass, right? And he told us that this was his holy guardian angel, right? He said that, we're talking about like back in 1904, him and his wife, I think it was Rose Kelly at the time. He had several wives who all went crazy, by the way, because he's a nut job. I think he drove them all to like be hooked on drugs and to go to insane asylums, and he beat them up. I mean, he's not a good dude. Aleister Crowley's not a good guy. And they were in Egypt. Rose Kelly, I think, his wife, the Scarlet Woman, he called them, was like, hey, they're calling you. They're calling you. We need to go to the museum. So they went to the museum, and he goes to exhibit number 666. And she was like, this is the spirit calling. And it was an exhibit for Horus. And what happened was, over the course of, I believe, like the next 3 nights, he had a disembodied voice talking to him, which you hear a lot of musical artists talk about this too, by the way. This isn't unique to Aleister Crowley. But Aleister Crowley scribed the Book of the Law, which is his sort of Bible of his religion of Thelema, which Thelema is arguably the new age we're living in. He said, look, Thelema is going to be the foundational book for the new age that I'm going to usher in, because this Aiwass spirit told me the truths about everything, and I wrote it all in this book. And he called it the Aeon of Horus, the new age of mankind. And this was the age where the term "do what thou wilt" comes from. But "do what thou wilt" is actually an old term, and this is again the recurring theme over and over and over. This isn't anything new. This is old. The religion of the future is the religion of the past. And what Crowley used, when like "do what thou wilt" came from Francis Rabelais, wrote this book forever ago, hundreds of years ago, that was about the Abbey of Thelema, which was a fictional tale. But in the Abbey of Thelema, anything went. It was like pure debauchery, and it's all this sort of wild stuff. You could fill in the blanks yourself. That's where he got that from. But anyhow, this spirit of Aiwass, to answer the question a little more. Sorry, I'm starting to ramble.
No, keep going. It's fascinating.
This Aiwass spirit basically dictated, and this is very similar to, not to knock on my Mormon friends, I love my Mormon friends, but Joseph Smith did a similar thing. He channeled a spirit of was it Moroni, I think, and he dictate, and he didn't. It wasn't quite the same. He didn't dictate to him what to write. But Moroni, this disembodied spirit, said, "Hey, there's these tablets of wisdom over here, and you can transcribe the wisdom," and it became the Book of Mormon, which is the sort of foundational document for the LDS. Well, Crowley did the same thing, channeled Aiwass to give him the language for the New Age, and the New Age, the emphasis will be on it'll be self-centered. It's on the will of the practitioner. Do what thou wilt. And he says specifically, it's not, the New Age is not going to be based upon gods and priests and doing what the religious tell you. It's about doing what you want to do. And that's a very YOLO idea, which is a very, obviously that's what we're experiencing right now. A lot of narcissistic personalities in our world. That's just the way it is. Obsessed over individual instead of the social collective. But he said that Aiwass was Lucifer. He said that in, I wish I could give you a citation of the book, but in one of the books, he talks about it. I'm going through my notes here. He talked about how Aiwass was in fact Lucifer, and then Kenneth Grant. I know we might be getting deep in the weeds here. I'll be quick. Kenneth
better,
Grant.
Deep in the
okay, all right.
Don't rush. Keep going. We'll bring you back.
Okay, so a lot of people admired Aleister Crowley. One such guy was a guy named Kenneth Grant, and he started what's called the Typhonian Ordo Templi Orientis, which was another magical order. Crowley ran the Ordo Templi Orientis, the OTO, a magical order, and one of his acolytes, Kenneth Grant, was like, "Hey, I'm going to start a different kind of OTO, and this one's going to be all about channeling disembodied entities, Typhon specifically, the god Typhon." But Kenneth Grant was like, "Hey, I made contact with Aiwass too, and he's from the Sirius star system, and Sirius is, again, massive rabbit hole topic. Sirius is the blazing star of Freemasonry. That's very clearly written in the Freemason documents. I don't think that's any kind of conspiracy. They talk about how the blazing star is the hidden sun, the sun behind the sun. They use this weird language, right? Because here's the thing. They use all this weird coded language because they can't come out and say, like, "Hey, we worship Lucifer." You know what I mean? Like, they can't do that. Like, that'll be shot down quick. So they're trying to, like, sort of, what do you call it? Like the frog in the boiling water kind of thing with us. But anyways, Kenneth Grant says Aiwass came from Sirius, and this is the source of thelemic current, and this will unlock all the mysteries. And once the mysteries of Typhon are unlocked, it will release all the entities from these other dimensions, very much like H.P. Lovecraft. Because you'll find when you research this, in fact, Peter Levenda wrote a book called The Dark Lord, and it was all about Kenneth Grant and H.P. Lovecraft and this idea that these occultists have of unleashing entities into our universe. And you can go wild with this conspiratorial thinking when you look at, like the Swiss Goddard tunnel ritual, where they were doing a bunch of weird stuff with fallen angels, and you're like, whoa, they're just opening a tunnel. Why is it all this satanic stuff? And then you got CERN doing all this weird stuff with the portals, and it just goes in a million directions. But to answer the question, Aiwass was Lucifer.
All right, so we had a question from Gaming about the alien invasion potentially being used by the government to restrict or get more control over the masses. What are your thoughts on that?
I get the line of thought there. It's possible, right? Anything's possible like that. When you get a threat, like, I understand do I believe that's a thing? I think it's possible, right? I think that anytime you're presented with a scary threat, you are apt to exchange your freedoms for security. Case in point, the Patriot Act was a response to 9/11. There was a lot of fear in America about, hey, maybe there's all these, scary groups. Being careful with my words. All these scary groups. We need to sort of have some kind of person looking through emails and stuff and making sure the scary groups aren't communicating and planning other things. So like I get it, right? I stand in both worlds with this kind of stuff, where it's like on some level I'm like, yeah, I kind of hope someone's watching out for the scary groups, but then I also get how it's also like, yeah, but you're trading your freedom for supposed security, and how much security are you really getting? So I don't have a good answer as to what I think to do about that. Do I think it's possible? 100%. Yeah.
So I was watching a show on aliens the other day in preparation for speaking to you again, and it brought up the concept of technological lockstep, which I wasn't familiar with. So basically, they have to be so far advanced in technology than us to get to us first, or vice versa. Do you have thoughts on technological lockstep?
Oh, that's interesting. I've never heard it phrased like that. The So like if you look at 5G, right? 5G is an interesting technological breakthrough. A lot of people don't understand that this. Okay, so we rewind a little bit. Ray Kurzweil, he's a futurist, director of engineering at Google, really smart guy. Also part of the transhuman agenda. And what he talked about many years ago was Moore's law, and the idea that every 2 years the number of transistors that fit on a chip double, and when you graph that out, it's an exponential curve of technology increasing. Mankind isn't prepared for that. Mankind thinks linearly. We don't think about how things can change exponentially, which is a very steep curve. That's a fancy way of saying a very steep curve. So technology going from, for example, from the year 2000 to 2010, it changes, X amount. Well, going from 2010 to 2020, it doesn't change X amount again. It changes X plus some amount. Then from 2020 to 2030, it's going to be X plus some amount plus a lot more amount, right? And 5G is supposed to be another one of these exponential jumps, kind of like when we jumped from barely being able to text on a phone to all of a sudden you've got apps and you're streaming music. It's going to be more than that. The jump is going to be more than that. It's called the Internet of Things, they call it. And I've read enough about it to know that different countries look at this as a sort of tactical advantage over one another. And there's a race to see who can sort of get this Internet of Things out there. And I don't know if it's going to be defense related or not. I couldn't tell you. It's like the new space race, they call it. And that's, well, I don't want to get you in trouble. We'll just leave it at that.
Yeah. So are we hypothetically in such a technological race against aliens then?
Against the aliens. So like if you believe in the aliens are interstellar, then those interstellar aliens have evolved many years ahead of us. It's too late, right? There's no catching up if that's the case. I myself I'm not saying it's impossible. There's extraterrestrial aliens, but I don't believe it necessarily, not yet. I do believe in interdimensional aliens, which angels, demons. I believe in all that. I think it's very much real. I think it's very much possible, and I think that given the amount of studies, occult literature that I've read, clearly they've been looking into this and trying to perfect it. The question is, what are they trying to do? Why are they trying to do it? And ultimately, the only thing I can come up with is they're trying to instill a new global religion and a new global Luciferian head of, the New World Order, basically.
Because this show proposed that if they're so sophisticated to get to us first, they have the technology to subjugate us. So it would be a threatening thing, a threatening visit. Do you think
Yeah,
that's a possible scenario?
yeah, I think totally. But I do think if there's another civilization extraterrestrially that has evolved further than us, I think that they would have evolved into digital streams of consciousness already. I think they would have abandoned the physical limitations of the human body, which is what our world is trying to do right now with transhumanism. It's trying to get rid of because you've got the second law of thermodynamics of entropy. Like everything deteriorates and degrades over time. The human body is just a physical thing that will degrade over time. So they're trying to, and again, this is an occult idea. This idea of becoming immortal, the philosopher's stone, all this kind of idea is something that the occultists want. It's something that the technocrats want. These Bill Gates, Ray Kurzweil, all these guys are obsessing over how do we live immortally, and Zuckerberg's like, oh, I got it. We'll put you in the metaverse. We'll strap in you into the VR goggles and you can live digitally on the metaverse. So I would argue that aliens, if they're further evolved and out there, they've already done that. They're not going to show up in a spaceship and walk around and say hi. But now again, I'm no expert on all this. I've actually consumed a lot of Roswell content recently, and sure seems like they found some bodies out there from what I've read and seen. So I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. Obviously, I've never seen an alien.
We've had a couple of questions come in about crop circles, which we've never discussed before on this channel. So Lottie Martin, I love corn circle patterns. Are they aliens? Super cool energies in corn circles. And then Anexus has asked, what does Isaac think the crop circle makers are telling us through their formations, discounting potentially man-made circles?
Right, and I for a while there I bought into the idea that they were all man-made circles, but I don't know that I believe that anymore. I do think that there could very well be some truth in crop circles. You'll notice that they look very much like sigils. If you dig through uh, grimoires and occult books of magic spells and that kind of thing, you'll notice it's a very similar look with these sigils and these characters. I don't know specifically what they're telling us, why they would do it. It doesn't make a lot of sense to me why they would do it, but that's what it looks like to me, is sigils.
Okay, so we have got the power of symbolism. How would you define symbolism?
So symbolism, Carl Jung said that symbolisms are what define man, and they think that, and it plays a big role when we're talking about aliens, because power and energy, we're talking about something that's not necessarily tangible, not necessarily concrete, and you can manifest or charge up energy through symbols, like the magnetic chain. Eliphas Levi talked about the magnetic chain and how a symbol can carry on a force in itself. This is all like ritual magic idea, and it's all about focusing energy to do whatever the magician wants, because they believe. And again, this goes back to alchemy. This goes back to Hermes Trismegistus, who was this pagan god to the ancient Egyptians, who came down and taught man these original. This is how the mythology goes. They believe that this Hermes guy came down and taught man how to use alchemical arts to perfect whatever ritual magic, create their own world. And one of these ideas that fell out from Hermes and the Emerald Tablets was as above, so below. It's a very common phrase, the law of correspondence. And the magicians subscribe to this, and they believe that through the power of thinking, through the power of focusing energy, through various kinds of magic, you can channel this energy into the cosmos. And again, this ties into the astrology stuff. Like we talked about, John Dee was an astrologer. They think that putting this energy out into the cosmos, that the world will literally rearrange itself and then reflect back down on Earth. So what that means is man can become God. Man can create change on his own. And that's a fundamental difference between the Abrahamic religions, right? Like Christianity and such, because in Christianity, you pray to God asking for something, and it's God's will, whatever happens. Whereas the magicians, they are more of a take charge group, and they're like, no, we're gonna make this happen, and symbols are used for all of this, and there's a long, rich history of symbolism being talked about by all these occultists. But yeah, it's
So Carl Jung wrote about universal symbols and symbols that we inherently understood or dreamed about before actually having any human contact with them. Do you believe in that? And how would you explain that we just instinctively can interpret these symbols?
yeah, it's pretty fascinating. They talk about the like with archetypes and the hero's journey and that kind of idea, that they're tapping into this reservoir of eternal truths that have been around forever and will be around forever. And this goes back to Plato, right? And Plato talked about the archaic remnants. A guy named Paracelsus, again another alchemist, he talked about I think the unus mundus is how they describe it. but the idea is that there is this, and I think Helena Blavatsky was talking about this kind of thing too, with the term escapes me, but it's this idea of tapping into some kind of hidden truth, which again, the occult means hidden. So I do think there's something to that. I think that symbolism of the sun, that's one such symbol that is used for hundreds and hundreds of years and to this day, and it symbolizes life. And there's something to be said for that. There's something to be said for how we experience the four seasons, right? It's spring is people go through like a seasonal depression in the winter time because symbolically the winter is death, and spring is like life anew, and there's a new energy that comes with that. So I personally feel a lot of those things. So I think there's something to that. uh, I do believe that. I think that there's some higher purpose for all these things that we feel. I don't know what the answer is. I don't know that science is ever going to answer that. I don't look to science. I always say science is a method. Science is a tool. It's not it's not a religion. It's not a way of life. Because science is very corruptible sometimes.
Well, Isaac, yet again, we've only touched on 2 of the talking points, of which we had many, many. We've gone 10 minutes over. So would love to get you back, brother, if you're up for it. And huge thank you to the viewers for all the questions. Thank you for your time, Isaac. Please tell the viewers where they can find you and support you.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks for having me back on. I appreciate it. I'm all over the place. I got a podcast. I've got a Patreon. I've got a website. I've got a million books out on Amazon and Audible. But you can go to allmylinks.com/Isaac W, 2 A's in Isaac. And you'll find the links to absolutely everything that I do right there.
Oh, thanks, Isaac. Wishing you all the best. Have a great rest of your day. Cheers.
Cheers. You too.